The Education of Little Tree by Forrest Carter. I ken ye, Bunny B., page 181. Looking back, I guess me and Grandpa was pretty dumb. Not Grandpa when it come to mountains or game or weather or any number of things, but when you got into words and books and such, well, me and Grandpa took the decision to Grandma. She straightened it out. Like the time the lady asked us for directions. We'd been to the settlement and we was on our way back home and pretty heavy loaded. We had so many books that we split them up. Grandpa was put out about the number of books. He said the librarian was pushing too many on us every month and he was getting different people tangled up in the stories. For the past month, he had been arguing that Alexander the Great sided with the big bankers at the Continental Congress and tried to undercut Mr. Jefferson. Grandma had been telling him that Alexander the Great was not politicking at that time and, as a matter of fact, was not living at that time. But Grandpa had it stuck in his mind, so he had to get the book back on Alexander the Great. Grandpa was tolerable sure that the book would prove out as to what Grandma said. I was tolerable sure myself, as I had never known Grandma to miss when it come to knowing what was in books. So in the back of our minds all the time, we knew Grandma was right, and Grandpa had come down pretty heavy on the idea that it was getting too many books that was the cause of the confusion, which sounded reasonable to me. Anyhow, I was carrying one of Mr. Shakespeare's books and the dictionary along with the can of coal oil. Grandpa had the rest of the books and a can of coffee. Grandma loved coffee, and I figured like Grandpa that the coffee would help out when we got to Alexander the Great, for the entire thing had been a worriment to Grandma for the solid month. We was on the road from the settlement, me walking behind Grandpa, when a big black car pulled up beside us and stopped. It was the biggest car I'd ever seen. There was 2 ladies and 2 men in the car, and it had glass windows that slid right down into the door. I had never seen such before, nor had Grandpa, for we both watched the window while it slid out of sight as the lady cranked on it. Later, Grandpa told me that he inspected it right close, and there was a narrow slit in the door that allowed the glass to go down. I didn't see it, for I was not tall enough. The lady was fine dressed with rings on her fingers and big baubles that hung from her ears. "Which way do we go to get to Chattanooga?" she asked, and you couldn't hardly hear the motor running on the car. Grandpa set the coffee can down on the ground and balanced his books on top of it so they wouldn't get dirty. I set down my coal oil can, for Grandpa always said that if you was spoken to, treat such with proper respect and give full attention to what was being said. After we had done that, Grandpa lifted his hat to the lady, which seemed like it made her feel bad, for she hollered at Grandpa, "I said, which way do we go to get to Chattanooga? Are you deaf?" Grandpa said, "No, ma'am. My hearing and health is fine today, thank ye." "How's yourn?" And Grandpa meant it, for it was custom to inquire about such as how people was feeling. Me and Grandpa was a little surprised when the woman acted like it made her mad, but that could have been because the other folks in the car was laughing at something she must have done. She hollered louder, "Are you going to tell us how to get to Chattanooga?" "Why, yes, ma'am," Grandpa said. "Well," the lady said, "tell us." "Well," Grandpa said, "first off, you're headed wrong, which is east. You want to go west. Now, not dead west, but sly off just a shade to the north, about where that big ridge is over yonder, and that ought to take you there." Grandpa lifted his hat again, and we bent to take up our loads. The lady stuck her head out of the window. "Are you for real?" she hollered. "What road do we take?" Grandpa straightened up surprised. "Well, I reckon whichever one goes west, ma'am, bearing in mind to sly off toward the north." "What are you, a couple of foreigners?" the lady asked. Now this set Grandpa back, It did me too, for I had never heard that word, and I don't think Grandpa had either. He looked at the lady for a dead minute, and then he said, real firm, I reckon. The big car taking off, still headed the way it had been going, which was east, and the wrong way. Grandpa shook his head and said in his 70-odd years he had struck up with some crazy people, but the lady proved up to any of them. I asked Grandpa if she could have been a politician, but he said he had never heard of a lady being a politician, though she could have been the wife of one. We turned off onto the wagon ruts, always on the way back from the settlement. When we got on the wagon ruts, I commenced to think of something to ask Grandpa. He always stopped when he was spoken to, as I say, to give full consideration to whatever was said. This gave me a chance to catch up. I reckon I was little for my age, 5 going on 6, for the top of my head came just above Grandpa's knees, and I was always in a continual trot behind him. I'd fallen back a good ways and was trotting hard, so I had to might near holler, Grandpa, have you ever been to Chattanooga? Grandpa stopped. No, he said, but I nearly went there once. I caught up and set down my coal oil can. Must have been 20, maybe 30 years ago, I reckon. Grandpa said, I had an Uncle Enoch, was his name, youngest of Pa's brothers. He was getting age on him, and when he liquored up, would oftentimes get addled in the head and wander off. Well, Uncle Enoch disappeared, which he oft did on high lonesomes back in the mountains, but this time it stretched out to 3 or 4 weeks. Set us to sending inquiries with travelers. Word come back that he was in Chattanooga in jail. I was set to go fetch him out when he showed up at the cabin. Grandpa paused to give thought to it and begun to laugh. Yes, sir, he showed up barefooted, with nothing but some old floppy breeches on that he had to hold up with one hand. He looked like he had been set upon by boar coons. He was that skint up. Turned out he had walked back every step of the way through the mountains. Grandpa stopped to laugh, and I sat down on the coal oil can which rested my legs. Uncle Enoch said he had got liquored up and didn't recollect about how he got there, but he woke up in a room in a bed with 2 women. He said he had just commenced to climb out of bed and disassociate himself from them when a banging set up on the door and a big feller busted in. The feller was mad and said one of the women was his wife and the other one was his sister. Seems like Uncle Enoch had somehow or other got associated with practically the entire family. Uncle Enoch said the women set up and commenced to holler for him to pay the feller something, and he said the feller was hollering, and Uncle Enoch was casting about trying to find his pants. Though he doubted there was any money in the pockets, he knowed he had a cutting knife, for the feller appeared like he meant business. But he couldn't find his pants, having no way in the world of knowing what he had done with them, and there was nothing else for him to do, so he leapt out a window. Trouble was, the window was 2 stories up, and Uncle Enoch hit spraddle out in the gravel and rock. That's how he got skint up. He hadn't a stitch of clothes on, but he found a window shade, having brought it down with him. He said he wrapped the window shade around his private parts and set about to hide until dark. Trouble was, he couldn't find no place to hide. Stepped out slap in the middle of a bunch of folks rushing around this way and that. He said they had no manners at all, and he liked to got run over twice. The law got him and put him in jail. Next morning they gave him some pants and a shirt and shoes too big for him, and put him out with some more fellers sweeping up the streets. Uncle Enoch said they was less than a round dozen of them all told doing the sweeping, and he didn't see any way in the world they could ever get that place cleaned up. He said people was throwing things down on the streets faster than they could sweep it up. He said he saw no point at all to the thing and determined he would leave. First chance he got, he broke and run. Feller grabbed his shirt, but he run out of it. Run out in his shoes too, but he held up his pants. He said he run into some trees and hid out till dark when he got his bearings by the stars and struck out for home. Taken him 3 weeks to make it across the mountains, grazing on acorns and hickory nuts like a hog. Cured Uncle Enoch's liquorin'. Wouldn't never go near a settlement again, far as I know. Nope. Grandpa said, I never been to Chattanooga. Ain't going neither. I made up my mind right then that I wasn't ever going to Chattanooga myself. We was at supper that night when it crossed my mind to ask Grandma, and so I said, Grandma, what is foreigners? Grandpa stopped eating, but he didn't look up from his plate. Grandma looked at me and then at Grandpa. Her eyes twinkled. Well, she said, foreigners is people that happen to be someplace where they wasn't born. Grandpa said, I explained that he reckoned we was foreigners, and I told about the lady in the big car and how she had said we was foreigners, and Grandpa said he reckoned. Grandpa pushed his plate back. I reckon that we wasn't born down there on the side of the road, which made us foreigners to them parts. Anyhow, it's another one of them dad-blame words. He always used dad-blame instead of damn in front of Grandma. That we can do without. There is, I have always said, 2 dad-blame many words. Grandma agreed that there was. Grandma didn't want to get into the word business. She had never, for example, got the words knowed and throwed disentangled with Grandpa. He said that knew was something you got which nobody ever used. That would be K-N-E-W. And that the word therefore was knowed. And he said through, T-H-R-E-W, was how you got from one side of a door to the other side, and therefore it was throwed. He wouldn't budge on it, as what he said made sense. Grandpa said if there was less words, there wouldn't be so much trouble in the world. He said privately to me that there was always some damn fool making up a word that served no purpose except to cause trouble, which is reasonable. Grandpa favored the sound, or how you said a word, as to its meaning. He said folks that spoke different words could feel the same thing by listening to the sound of music. Grandma agreed with him because that's the way they talked to each other. Grandma's name was Bonnie B. I knew that when I heard him late at night say, I ken you, Bonnie B. He was saying, I love you, for the feeling was in the words. And when they would be talking and Grandma would say, do you ken me, Wales? And he would answer, I ken you. It meant I understand you. To them, love and understanding was the same thing. Grandpa said you couldn't love something you didn't understand, nor could you love people nor God if you didn't understand the people and God. Grandpa and Grandma had an understanding, and so they had a love. Grandma said the understanding run deeper as the years went by, and she reckoned it would get beyond anything mortal folks could think upon or explain, and so they called it kin, K-I-N. Grandpa said back before his time, kin folks meant any folks that you understood and had an understanding with, so it meant loved folks. But people got selfish and brought it down to mean just blood relatives, but that actually it was never meant to mean that. Grandpa said when he was a little boy, his pa had a friend who oftentimes hung around their cabin. He said he was an old Cherokee named Coon Jack, and he was continually distempered and cantankerous. He couldn't figure out what his pa saw in old Coon Jack. He said they went irregular to a little church house down in a holler. One Sunday it was testifying time when folks would stand up as they felt the Lord called on them and testify as to their sins and how much they loved the Lord. Grandpa said at this testifying time, Coon Jack stood up and said, I hear tell they's some in here been talking about me behind my back. I want you to know that I'm awares. I know what's the matter with ye. Ye're jealous because the deacon board put me in charge of the key to the songbook box. Well, let me tell ye, and any of ye don't like it, I got the difference right here in my pocket. Grandpa said, sure enough, Coon Jack lifted his deer shirt and showed a pistol handle. He was stomping mad. Grandpa said that church house was full of some hard men, including his pa, who would soon as not shoot you if the weather changed, but nobody raised an eyebrow. He said his pa stood up and said, Coon Jack, every man here admires the way ye have handled the key to the songbook box. Best handling ever been done. If words has been mistook to cause you discomfort, I here now state the sorrow of every man present. Coon Jack sat down, total mollified and contented, as was everybody else. On the way home, Grandpa asked his pa why Coon Jack could get away with such talk. And Grandpa said he got to laughing about Coon Jack acting so important over the key to the song box. He said his pa told him, son, don't laugh at Coon Jack. You see, when the Cherokee was forced to give up his home and go to the nations, Coon Jack was young. And he hid out in these mountains and he fought to hold on. When the war between the states come, he saw maybe he could fight that same government and get back the land and homes. He fought hard. Both times he lost. When the war ended, the politicians set in, trying to get what was left of what we had. Coon Jack fought and run and hid and fought some more. You see, Coon Jack come up in the time of fighting. All he's got now is the key to the songbook box. And if Coon Jack seems cantankerous, well, there ain't nothing left for Coon Jack to fight. He never knowed nothing else. Grandpa said he come might near crying for old Coon Jack. He said after that, it didn't matter what Coon Jack said or did. He loved him because he understood him. Grandpa said such was kin, and most of people's mortal trouble come about by not practicing it from that and politicians, of course. I could see that right off and might near cried about Coon Jack myself. End of chapter.